Hello and welcome to the webinar. In today's webinar, we'll be looking at multi-factor authentication on class, the impact on our users, and how to set it up. My name is Philip Bodie, and I am the Transitions and Systems Compliance Manager at Class. I also have Gopi Sidaralingam, our Product Manager for Class Portfolio, driving the slides. He will also be assisting with the demo later on. Just a brief introduction for the webinar. We'll look at what MFA entails and the reasons behind the implementation of MFA. What MFA actually means for our users and what the impacts are. We'll then perform a demo of how to set up MFA and logging into class with MFA. We'll finish off with some useful user guide references and resources on MFA that you can use to manage and maintain MFA on class. What is happening and why? Multi-factor authentication is all about protecting client information. The ATO introduced a new initiative to protect client information by creating minimum security standards for service providers that consume or connect to the ATO's digital services. This initiative is known as the Digital Service Provider Operational Framework. This affects all systems that contain super or tax-related information and or connect to the ATO digital services. One of the key requirements of the data protection standards is multi-factor authentication, or MFA for short. MFA is a method of authentication that uses two or more authentication factors from different categories to authenticate a single user. This means when a user logs onto class, once MFA has been activated, they will need their class username and password as well as enter an authentication code. The authentication code will be created by an authenticator app such as Google or Microsoft Authenticator. Our class will share the ATO's consent for protecting information and take security and privacy matters very seriously. Clients such as yourselves hold sensitive and personal data of many trustees, members, and investors' information on class. We are committed to keeping everyone's data secure. Accordingly, we have introduced MFA by adding in a second factor for authenticating users when they access class. MFA is a mandatory requirement by the ATO, and it will become mandatory after 31st of March 2019. That is the end of this month. MFA applies to any user that logs into class and can access super and tax information that belongs to other individuals. This means MFA applies to the following user roles: access controller, administrator, tax agent, advisor, and auditor roles. MFA does not apply to users that access their own information, such as your client accessing client view or the class investor app to view their own information. As part of introducing MFA as well, we have also made it easier for auditors to manage and maintain MFA. We have introduced additional functionality to enable auditors to self-maintain their own users. We have done this by adding a new role called Auditor Admin. This role essentially introduces a new user maintenance portal for auditors to easily issue and maintain access to members of the engagement team without having to rely on defined administrators. This eases the work for administrators and gives auditors the ability to maintain their own users. We will now proceed with the demo of setting up MFA and logging into class with MFA. MFA has been available in class for some time now. Currently, it is optional for the businesses and or users to activate MFA. As I mentioned earlier, MFA will, after 31 March, become mandatory. We recommend you activate MFA as soon as possible if you have not already done so. This will allow your users to familiarize themselves with MFA prior to it becoming mandatory. It is always best security practice to have the additional protection as well. You can activate MFA for the entire business by updating the security settings under settings, then security, and then setting the question require multi-factor authentication to yes. So just wait for the system to load. And as you can see, the question there, you just set that to yes, and then you hit save. Once this is done, MFA will be activated for the entire business. So this means the next time your users log into class, they will be required to set up MFA. We will, of course, go through the setup process as well. A user can also activate MFA for their account by hovering over the user icon and then clicking on multi-factor authentication. This takes the user to the MFA setup page. We will now go through the setup process. To set up MFA, you need a phone with an authenticator app installed on the phone. Some of the common authenticator apps, as I mentioned earlier, are Google Authenticator and Microsoft Authenticator. There are, of course, other authenticator apps that you can also use. You need to open the app on your phone and press on the plus sign to add a new account by scanning the unique QR code presented on the screen. Once the account has been added to the Authenticator app, it will display a 6-digit code. The code refreshes every 60 seconds. So if you are unable to enter in the code presented on the phone, within 60 seconds it will present you with new code. Once we enter in the new code, we proceed with entering that new code and then verify code and turn on MFA. Now that MFA is set up, the next time we log into class, we will need to pass the multi-factor authentication to access class. Let's log in now. As usual, we need to enter our username and password. We also need to enter in the 6-digit code from the Authenticator app. So we'll look this up from the phone and put in the Authenticator code. Please also note that, as you can see at the bottom, you can set for the MFA to be remembered on this device for 30 days. If you tick this box, this essentially means that you do not have to pass the second factor for 30 days. So you'd only have to pass the second factor again after that 30 days has elapsed. Yep. Put in a code. Yep, and that now passes that authentication. So that's essentially how you can set up MFA and log into class with MFA. MFA has also been enabled in the Excel fund loader and Excel transaction loader. When the user uses the loader to submit information to class, the user will need to also pass the multi-factor authentication. We will demonstrate with the Excel fund loader. We have just put in some basic details in the loader just to demonstrate. We'll go ahead and submit the information to class. If the user already has MFA set up, you get a window to enter your credentials. We just need to enter the credentials and the authenticator code. If the user did not already have MFA set up, they would be directed to the setup process so they can set up MFA. In this instance, we do have MFA already set up, so we just enter our credentials and the authenticator code, and we can see the fund has submitted successfully. We have built-in smarts for the loader to retain your credentials, which includes the authenticator code for 15 minutes on a particular device. This allows you to submit information via the loader for 15 minutes without having to re-enter your credentials and the authenticator code. This is quite handy as it means you don't have to re-enter your credentials each time you submit information within the specified time frame. If we were to use the loader again to submit another fund, in this case, we'll just change the code to demonstrate. We do not need to re-enter our credentials, and we can see the data has been successfully loaded. You can turn this feature off by enabling an inbuilt macro to switch users. Once you turn on the macro, you'll be required to enter your credentials and authenticator code on your next submission. So to do this, you go to macros, view macros, and then look for toggle switch button, and then run. This will put this button at the top, and then if you just click that, you will get a message that login credentials will be required on next submission. So you click OK. Now if we were to submit information again with the loader, if we click submit fund details again, we'll be required to pass our credentials again. The transaction loader works in the same manner. The only difference is it can take a fair bit of time using the generate tax payment feature. So we have made an allowance for the 15 minutes MFA timeout not to apply. For this to happen, you need to ensure the MFA session remains active and you do not close the session window. We'll now proceed to demo how you can set the new role that we've introduced for auditors. As I mentioned before, we have introduced new roles specifically for auditors to maintain their own users. We will now demo that process for adding the new role to an auditor and what this means for the auditor. You want to add this role to the principal auditor. For the purposes of this demo, we already have an auditor set up, Go PS, I believe. We will add the new role to this auditor. So to do this, we click on the contact, then we click on roles and add role and select auditor admin. The auditor currently doesn't have any access issued as yet, so we'll set the relationship and grant it access in this example to the entire business. Once we've granted access, the auditor will receive an invitation. We will retrieve the email and accept the invitation and set a password as per usual. So the email, click there to accept the invitation. So we'll put in the password, and click on accept. And this auditor already has MFA set up, so we'll need to put in the authenticator code to pass access to class. So we'll just put in the authenticator code now. So once we log in, we take into class as per usual. Now, in this particular example, this auditor has access to the entire business, and it's only one business that they have access to on class. So we are presented with the fund list for that business, which was Apple Accounting. To maintain user access for the engagement team, the auditor needs to hover over the user icon, and you now see this new menu item called Manage Auditors. So we'll click on that. This will present the user maintenance portal. So for the first time the auditor logs in and accesses this managed auditor, he just needs to put in some basic details to set up his profile. So the details are just their business name, their business address, and contact details. Once that's been done, you hit save, and you can now click on the auditor list. So this auditor list allows you now to maintain your users. So to add a new user, you click on new auditor. So these are members of the engagement team. So you complete the relevant details. And the email for that user. So in this example, this is just for demonstration purposes. It's not an actual email. Click on that here. And then click on invite. So this user would now receive an invitation email, and as per usual, they just need to follow the steps in that invitation email to accept the invitation. They will be required to set up MFA. It goes through the same process that we went through in setting up MFA, and then log into class with that multi-factor authentication. Once they log into class, they'll be able to view the exact same permission that the principal auditor that issued the access has on class. Now for the auditor, again, the auditor can easily maintain this user, the users, by, they can delete a user if that user is no longer required, or if they need to add in a new user, they just simply click on new auditor again. Once you're done with the user maintenance, if they want to return to class, they simply need to click on the class logo on the top left corner. This takes them back to the fund list page. Okay, so that's it for setting up the auditor admin role. So as part of introducing MFA, we've also developed the functionality for users to reset MFA. Currently, to reset MFA, you need to contact our support team. So just a general contact, support@class.com.au. We are working on a self-service option for resetting MFA, and we aim to deliver this prior to MFA becoming mandatory on the 31st of March 2019. So once this feature has been developed, users will be able to reset their own MFA if they need to by simply answering some challenge questions and following the instructions to reset an MFA. Okay. So we'll now wrap up the webinar. We have some useful user guide pages and resources that you can refer to if you require assistance to manage and maintain MFA for the auditor admin role. This webinar will also be available as a video for your reference. When you close out of this webinar session, you'll be presented with a survey. We would appreciate it if you could please take a few moments to complete the survey. You can also send any questions you have on any of the content covered within the survey. Thank you once again for your time.